Top 10 US states with the largest African American populations, 2023. Important disclaimer, this video does not promote any kind of racism, we will only talk about the facts. The proportion of the African American population in the U.S. states have significantly varied since the days of institutionalized slavery and the Civil War. While the African Americans have made significant achievements in several fields, they still trail other groups of people in the country in terms of wealth and education. But before starting the video, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and like the video, so let's start. Number 10, Virginia. The African American population in Virginia is around 1,551,399, accounting for 19.4% of the state's total population and 4% of the nation's African American population. African Americans have lived in the state since 1619 when a Dutch ship sold about 20 African slaves here. As black slavery took root in Virginia after 1680, the numbers of African Americans increased. By 1704, 10,000 slaves were living in Virginia. Arthur Ashe was the first African American man to win a tennis Grand Slam. Willie Lanier became the first African American to play middle linebacker for Kansas City, Virginia, also produced many civil rights leaders. Number 9, Delaware. Delaware's African American population is around 191,814, which accounts for 21.4% of the state's total population and 0.5% of the nation's African American population. The first ever documented African American in Delaware, which was then New Sweden, was a West Indies slave named Antony Swart. The first perpetrators of black slavery in Delaware were the Dutch, who had settled there in 1631. Unemployment in Delaware among African Americans stands at 12%. Graduation rates for African Americans in Delaware were the lowest in 2014 among all other races. Number 8, North Carolina. There are 2,048,628 African Americans in North Carolina, accounting for 21.5% of the state's total population and 5.3% of the nation's African American population. Abolitionists Harriet Jacobs and Thomas H. Jones were born here, as was Dr. Charlotte Hawkins Brown, an educator. In 1902, Dr. Hawkins founded the Palmer Memorial Institute that educated 2,000 African American students throughout its 70-year-long history. According to the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources. Still, today graduation rates for African Americans are the second lowest among races in the state after Hispanics. Number 7, Alabama. Alabama's African American population is 1,251,311, and it accounts for 26.2% of the state's population and 3.2% of the nation's African American population according to the 2010 census. Alabama is steeped in black history. In early 1965, protesters led by Martin Luther King Jr., who were yearning for African Americans receiving the right to vote and other basic civil liberties. Still, Alabama grapples with high unemployment rates among its African American populace. In the second quarter of 2015, unemployment among African Americans stood at 10.9%, more than double the white unemployment rates in the state. Number 6, South Carolina. South Carolina's African American population is 1,290,684, accounting for 27.9% of the state's population and 3.3% of the U.S. African American population. The state is known for the Stono Rebellion of September 9, 1739, which was the largest slave uprising in the colonies before the American Revolution. Among African Americans, unemployment is nearly 3 times more than rates among whites according to EPI. Number 5, Maryland. Maryland's African American population is 1,700,298, which accounts for 29.4% of the state's population and 4.4% of America's African American population. Still, there are many challenges for African Americans living today in Maryland. Unemployment rates among them are twice those seen among whites. They are also 5.6 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than whites. Number 4, Georgia. African Americans in Georgia number around 2,950,435. They account for 30.5% of the state's population and 7.6% of the nation's African Americans. The state, which has often been dubbed as the Black Mecca, is the birth and burial place of civil rights activist Martin Luther King. Poverty levels are still a problem for African Americans in the state. Number 3, Louisiana. Louisiana's African American population is 1,452,396. This accounts for 32.4% of the state's total population and 3.7% of the nation's African American population. The state is historically known for producing such notable blacks as Israel Meyer Augustine Jr., the first African American to become a district judge in 1970. Louisiana ranked at 43rd in the nation in terms of black male high school graduation rates. African American poverty levels are the highest of all races in the state. Number 2, Mississippi. Mississippi's African American population is 1,098,385, which is 37.3% of the state's population and 2.8% of the entire African American population, as per 2020 the U.S. Census. The state is renowned for Hiram Rhodes Revels, the first African American man to serve in the U.S. Congress in 1870. Mississippi's African American unemployment rate is the 9th highest among 24 states with measurable black populations. It is also 3 to 4 times higher than that of the white population. Now let's see our number 1 state. District of Columbia. According to the 2010 U.S. Census, the African American population in the District of Columbia, D.C., is around 305,125. This accounts for 50.7% of the total population and 0.8% of the entire nation Black, African American. Now Black population is decline in D.C. in recent years. So let's end today's video. Thanks for watching.